The ticking of the wall clock in Ethan's home office echoed in the silence, each second amplifying his sense of unease. Ethan Warner, at 38, had always prided himself on his ability to analyze problems and solve them with precision, an indispensable skill in his career as a software developer. His calm demeanor was both a blessing and a curse. It made him the steady, dependable man Vanessa had once fallen in love with, but it also made him easy to overlook, a quality he now suspected his wife had exploited. Vanessa's recent behavior gnawed at his mind. Once the cornerstone of their marriage, their easy camaraderie had been replaced with a strained distance. Her phone had become a barrier, always clutched tightly in her hands, her eyes scanning its glowing screen with an intensity Ethan hadn't seen directed at him in months. Whispered conversations and late nights at work became the norm, explanations always at the ready. A new project, an unpredictable boss, last-minute deadlines. Ethan nodded at her words, though the seed of doubt planted itself deeper every time. He told himself he was imagining things. Paranoia didn't suit him. And yet, one particularly quiet afternoon, while sorting through their shared digital files to declutter their drives, Ethan came across an unfamiliar document title, Lease Agreement, High Point Lofts. A cold unease settled in his chest as he clicked it open. The document revealed an apartment rental agreement. Vanessa Warner listed as the tenant. A spacious, modern loft in the heart of the city, secured only 3 weeks ago. The monthly rent was staggering, far beyond what their budget or her income could reasonably sustain without raising questions. Ethan stared at the screen for several long minutes, his thoughts racing. Vanessa had never mentioned anything about an apartment. They had always shared everything from financial decisions to dinner plans. The Vanessa he thought he knew wouldn't hide something this significant. Unless she had a reason. His heart pounded as he ran his fingers over the desk, seeking stability. Was there a reasonable explanation? Perhaps it was for a family member? A surprise for him? The rationalizations felt hollow, even as he entertained them. That evening, Ethan decided to play his part. When Vanessa walked through the door, her hair windswept and her excuse about a late client meeting at the ready, he greeted her with his usual calm smile. Aha, this is great to see, thanked him and moved on to the dining room, her phone already in her hand. She didn't notice his subtle questions over dinner. She was too engrossed in her plate, too busy ensuring her story didn't fall apart under his gentle probes. Any big news at work? Ethan asked between bites, keeping his tone neutral. Vanessa shook her head quickly, then paused. Oh, just the usual chaos, but it's under control. The words tumbled out too fast and she avoided eye contact. Ethan didn't push, letting the silence linger just long enough to make her uncomfortable before changing the subject. He noted how her shoulders relaxed slightly, a fleeting relief that did nothing to calm his growing suspicion. Later that night, Vanessa drifted off to sleep, her breathing slow and steady, while Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed every interaction, every shift in her tone, every excuse. He realized now that she hadn't become distant overnight. The changes had been gradual, a slow erosion of their connection that he had been too preoccupied to notice. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan started small. He cross-referenced their bank statements, searching for transactions that might connect to the luxury loft. Sure enough, a wire transfer from her personal account matched the deposit amount listed on the lease. The final piece of evidence came from her emails, unearthed after hours of cautious sleuthing through her unguarded laptop. A series of correspondences with someone named Lucas filled the screen. The exchanges were flirtatious, riddled with innuendos, and grew progressively intimate. A particular message stood out. Can't wait to spend more time at the loft. It feels like our space. Ethan's stomach turned. This wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown double life. The realization hit him like a freight train, but rather than break under its weight, Ethan felt a surge of clarity. His outward passivity had always been mistaken for weakness, but it was, in fact, his greatest strength. He had the ability to observe, to wait, to plan. Vanessa believed he was oblivious, too naive to see the signs. She was wrong. That night, Ethan made his decision. He wasn't going to confront her, not yet. This wasn't a problem to be solved with shouting matches and broken plates. It required precision, strategy, and patience. Vanessa had crafted the perfect illusion. Now, Ethan would dismantle it, piece by calculated piece. And when the time was right, he would ensure she never saw him coming. The world around Ethan seemed to move in slow motion as the truth unraveled before him. Each discovery brought clarity, but also sharpened the sting of betrayal. For days after finding Vanessa's lease and the incriminating emails, Ethan became a ghost in his own home. He observed, he listened, and he waited. While Vanessa went about her routine, Ethan's reality had shifted. He wasn't her husband anymore, not in her eyes. He was a fixture, a background detail in the picture she was painting for someone else. He started to notice everything. The way she lingered just a moment too long over her texts. The subtle smile tugging at her lips when a new message pinged on her phone. The excuses that were always airtight but left him cold. Late meetings, a client dinner, the gym. All lies, Ethan realized, woven carefully to keep him docile. In the quiet hours of the night, while Vanessa slept soundly beside him, Ethan's thoughts raced. He couldn't stop replaying her words during a recent phone call. She had stepped into the kitchen. To take it, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. No, no. He's completely clueless. Her laughter had been light, dismissive, but it had reverberated in Ethan's mind like a thunderclap. With each new thread he pulled, Ethan began constructing a timeline. Vanessa's behavior had changed several months ago, and now it all made sense. A sudden interest in networking events, unexplained weekends away, designer outfits that hadn't come from their shared budget. The puzzle was falling into place, and at its center was the name he'd found in her emails. Lucas. Ethan rented a car 2 towns over, paying in cash, careful not to leave a trail. That Saturday, while Vanessa claimed she was attending a client's gallery opening, Ethan followed her. Keeping a safe distance, he trailed her from the suburban neighborhood to the city, his heart pounding as he maintained his disguise. She parked near High Point Lofts, the sleek modern apartment complex Ethan already knew about. He watched from across the street as she walked inside, her gait confident, her movements practiced. It was a side of Vanessa he hadn't seen in years. Relaxed, unguarded, happy. When she reappeared moments later, she wasn't alone. A man joined her, tall, impeccably dressed and radiating the kind of charm that immediately grated on Ethan's nerves. This was Lucas. The way Vanessa's face lit up when she saw him felt like a knife twisting in Ethan's chest. Lucas leaned in to kiss her cheek, but the gesture lingered, and she tilted her head just slightly, letting their faces hover closer than any casual greeting should allow. Then they were laughing, their body language intimate as they disappeared into the building. Ethan didn't move. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as his mind worked furiously. Anger bubbled up, but he didn't let it consume him. Instead, he filed the moment away, another piece of evidence in a growing collection. The next day, Ethan hacked into their shared financial account, scanning for anything unusual. What he found sent another jolt through him. Vanessa had been withdrawing small amounts over the last 6 months, siphoning money into a separate account she hadn't mentioned. It wasn't much at a time, just enough to avoid suspicion, but over the course of half a year it had grown into a significant sum. The withdrawal pattern coincided almost perfectly with the timeline of her affair. Ethan realized he wasn't just dealing with infidelity, He was dealing with someone meticulously building an escape plan. He hired a private investigator to confirm what he couldn't prove himself. It was a calculated risk, but Ethan knew he needed more than his suspicions. Within days, the investigator delivered photographs. Vanessa and Lucas at an upscale restaurant, their hands brushing across the table. Vanessa letting herself into the High Point loft with a spare key. The two of them browsing art galleries on a weekday afternoon, laughing like a couple without a care in the world. The next set of findings was even more damning. Lucas wasn't just Vanessa's lover, he was using her. The investigator uncovered financial records indicating that Lucas was struggling to keep his business afloat. The lavish dates and expensive gifts he showered Vanessa with, all funded by a shell company that was hemorrhaging money. It became clear to Ethan that Lucas was not the knight in shining armor Vanessa might have believed him to be. He was a parasite, siphoning funds and relying on Vanessa's financial contributions to prop up his failing ventures. The realization didn't bring Ethan any relief. If anything, it made the betrayal worse. Vanessa wasn't just betraying their marriage, she was risking their financial future, their stability, for a man who would discard her the moment she became inconvenient. Ethan's quiet surveillance continued. He parked across from the loft again, this time with a camera, capturing the moments that might one day matter in court. He noted the frequency of her visits, the way she seemed to glow in Lucas's presence, and the carefree way they laughed together in the loft's well-lit living room. But Ethan also noticed something else. Vanessa was a pawn in Lucas's game. While she laughed and sipped wine, Lucas's attention often strayed to his phone or his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Ethan couldn't see the screen, but the investigator's intel suggested he was dealing with mounting debt and desperate investors. The more Ethan watched, the more his anger sharpened into resolve. This wasn't just personal. Vanessa's deceit was reckless, and Lucas's schemes were a threat not just to Ethan's marriage, but to his livelihood. Ethan turned off the engine and sat in silence, the glow of the loft's windows reflected in his rear-view mirror. He'd learned enough for now. He didn't want to destroy Vanessa on a whim or out of anger. He would wait until the pieces were perfectly aligned, until he could dismantle her lies and Lucas's schemes in one fell swoop. When Ethan drove away that night, his plan was no longer about uncovering the truth. It was about deciding how and when to use it. Ethan's world had shifted irreparably. Every smile Vanessa gave him, every casual touch, every glance at her phone now felt like a mockery, yet he maintained his composure, playing the part of the clueless husband while his mind churned with purpose. The third weekend since his discoveries brought him closer to a line he knew he could never uncross. The day started as innocuously as any other. Vanessa was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while sipping coffee, her back to Ethan. He observed her carefully. She was humming. Soft, barely audible. It was a melody Ethan didn't recognize, one she'd probably picked up from Lucas. He felt a flicker of rage, but tamped it down. "Anything exciting planned today?" he asked casually, leaning against the counter. Vanessa barely glanced up. "Just work things. It might run late." She didn't elaborate, and Ethan didn't press. He had stopped asking detailed questions weeks ago, knowing her answers would be crafted lies. It was easier to let her think he wasn't paying attention. Her growing confidence in his supposed obliviousness was a weapon Ethan was sharpening against her. After Vanessa left the house, Ethan retreated to his study. He unlocked his laptop and opened a private folder containing everything he'd collected. The lease agreement. Photos from the investigator. Screenshots of text messages between Vanessa and Lucas, culled from a cloning app Ethan had installed on her phone. The depth of their betrayal stared back at him. But there was no time for self-pity. His anger, once a boiling storm, had crystallized into something far colder: focus. He reviewed the evidence with a meticulous eye, piecing together a timeline. The affair wasn't a recent development. It had started nearly a year ago. Vanessa's first text exchange with Lucas was dated 11 months prior. casual at first, then escalating into flirtation. The earliest transactions tied to her secret bank account began around the same time. Ethan noted another pattern. Lucas's demands grew more frequent and bold as time went on. In the messages, he requested money under the guise of business expenses or emergencies. "The gallery lease is up. I could lose everything. If I don't get this investor on board, it's over." Vanessa always responded with reassurance. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." The realization left a bitter taste in Ethan's mouth. Vanessa wasn't just cheating, she was financing Lucas's failing ventures with their money. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His plan was becoming clearer, but it required patience and precision. If he confronted Vanessa now, she would deny everything, twist the narrative, and play the victim. He couldn't allow that. A knock on the study door interrupted his thoughts. It was his neighbor, Jim, a retired cop and one of the few people Ethan trusted. "Hey, Ethan," Jim said, stepping inside. "I got your text. What's going on?" Ethan gestured to the files spread across his desk. "I need your advice on something. Delicate." Jim listened in silence as Ethan explained, his expression darkening with every word. "This Lucas guy sounds like trouble," Jim said finally. "He's not just after your wife, he's after your wallet, maybe more." "I know," Ethan said, his voice steady. "That's why I need to be smart about this. I want to dismantle him piece by piece." Jim nodded approvingly. "You've already got a good start, but you'll need more if you want to take him down completely. Bank records, business dealings. A guy like him has skeletons in his closet. You just have to find them." Over the next few days, Ethan worked with ruthless efficiency. He dug deeper into Lucas's background, tracing his financial connections and identifying weaknesses. Lucas's gallery was a front, an extravagant facade hiding a crumbling empire. Several investors had already pulled out, citing mismanagement. Ethan also discovered that Lucas had a history of targeting wealthy women. Vanessa was just the latest in a long line of victims. It was during this phase of research that Ethan hit upon an idea that sent a chill down his spine. Lucas might not be working alone. Ethan combed through Vanessa's phone records and emails, looking for other suspicious contacts. One name stood out: Miranda, Vanessa's co-worker and close friend. Miranda had always seemed harmless, but Ethan's investigator uncovered a different story. She had introduced Vanessa to Lucas at a networking event months earlier. Further digging revealed that Miranda had received payments from Lucas's business account. She was a recruiter, drawing in vulnerable women and grooming them for Lucas to exploit. The betrayal widened, but so did Ethan's resolve. He crafted the final phase of his plan over the next 2 weeks. He started by gathering evidence against Lucas that went beyond the affair, proof of fraud, embezzlement, and financial manipulation. With Jim's help, Ethan passed the information to a contact at the district attorney's office. Then Ethan turned his attention to Vanessa. He couldn't confront her yet, but he needed her to believe she was still in control. He played his part perfectly. Distracted, tired, and utterly unsuspecting, he let her come and go as she pleased, even feigning indifference when she announced she'd be working late yet again. On the night of Vanessa's next rendezvous with Lucas, Ethan set his plan in motion. He parked down the street from the loft, waiting in the shadows as Vanessa arrived. He gave her 15 minutes before following her inside, using the spare key she didn't know he had copied. The scene that greeted him was almost cinematic. Vanessa and Lucas on the couch, laughing and sipping wine. Ethan stepped into the room, his sudden presence freezing them in place. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "Funny," Ethan said, his voice ice cold. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Lucas recovered quickly, standing and offering a charming smile. "Hey, man, this isn't what it looks like." Ethan cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Oh, I know exactly what this is, and trust me, you're going to regret it." He dropped a manila envelope onto the coffee table. Inside were copies of the photos, bank statements, and text messages he'd collected. Vanessa reached for it with trembling hands, flipping through the pages as her breath hitched. This isn't fair," she stammered. "You've been spying on me." Quote, "Fair?" Ethan's voice rose, his anger finally spilling over. "You want to talk about fair? You lied to me, stole from me, and humiliated me. You think you can just walk away from this unscathed?" Lucas tried to interject, but Ethan silenced him with a glare. "Don't bother. The authorities will be very interested in your little financial schemes. And as for you, Vanessa, you'll be lucky if you walk away with anything." Before either of them could respond, Ethan turned on his heel and left. As he stepped into the cool night air, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. The breaking point had come, but it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of Vanessa and Lucas's reckoning, and Ethan's liberation. The morning of the dinner party dawned clear and crisp, the kind of day that gave no indication of the storm brewing beneath Ethan's calm exterior. The evening promised to be a glamorous affair, a gathering of friends, colleagues, and acquaintances in the opulent dining room Vanessa had painstakingly curated over the years. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. She had been planning to host a grand celebration of their perfect marriage while living a double life just blocks away. Ethan spent the day in quiet preparation, carefully laying the groundwork for what he had in store. Every detail had been accounted for, every contingency planned. This wasn't just about exposing Vanessa and Lucas. It was about ensuring they faced the consequences of their actions in every sphere of their lives. The first step was an anonymous email sent to Lucas's investors early that morning. The email included key excerpts from the dossier Ethan had compiled, exposing Lucas's embezzlement, his misuse of company funds, and the financial peril his business was in. Ethan had crafted the email carefully, using just enough evidence to make the claims undeniable, while leaving his own identity untraceable. By mid-afternoon, word had spread through Lucas's professional network. Ethan had set up alerts to monitor chatter online, and the fallout was immediate. Investors pulled out, one by one, leaving Lucas's gallery and his livelihood in ruins. Ethan smiled grimly as the notifications piled up on his phone. That was phase one. As the day progressed, Vanessa flitted about the house, directing caterers and fussing over flower arrangements. Her face was a mask of composure, but Ethan could see the cracks forming. She hadn't mentioned the argument at the loft, or the damning evidence he'd shown her. It was as though she'd decided to pretend it had never happened. Ethan, meanwhile, played the part of the dutiful husband perfectly. He helped set the table, complimented Vanessa's dress, and even made light conversation with the caterers. If she noticed the undercurrent of tension in his demeanour, she didn't show it. By the time the first guests arrived, the house was buzzing with life. The dining room sparkled under the light of the chandelier, and the scent of expertly prepared hors d'oeuvres filled the air. Ethan watched as Vanessa worked the room, her laugh too bright, her gestures too exaggerated. She was performing, trying to hold on to the illusion for as long as possible. Lucas wasn't supposed to be there that night. Vanessa had told Ethan she had cut ties with him, but Ethan knew better. Sure enough, halfway through the evening, Lucas walked through the door, uninvited, but clearly expected by Vanessa. Ethan's stomach churned, but he didn't falter. He had planned for this. When dinner was served, the guests took their seats around the long table, their laughter and chatter filling the room. Vanessa had spared no expense. Every plate was a work of art, every glass brimming with expensive wine. It was a scene out of a magazine, the kind of setting that screamed perfection. Ethan waited until the first course was served before he made his move. He stood, raising his glass, and tapped it lightly with a fork. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm but carrying a note of authority that silenced the room, "before we go any further, I'd like to propose a toast." Vanessa beamed at him, her smile strained but radiant. "To love," she interjected quickly, raising her glass. Ethan turned to her, his own smile razor-sharp. "To loyalty," he corrected, his eyes locking onto hers. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Vanessa's smile faltered. "Ethan, what are you—" He didn't let her finish. Reaching behind him, he picked up a manila folder he had placed discreetly on a side table earlier in the evening. He opened it and began pulling out the contents: photos of Vanessa and Lucas, bank statements showing the siphoning of funds, and a copy of the lease agreement for the High Point loft. "I thought it was only fair to share a few things with everyone here tonight," Ethan said, his tone icy but controlled. He turned to the crowd. "You see, while I've been working here to support our family, Vanessa has been... Gasps filled the room as he laid the photos and documents on the table for everyone to see. Vanessa's face turned ghostly pale, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find words. Lucas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice rising. "You've got no right—" Ethan cut him off with a laugh. "No right. You've been sleeping with my wife and stealing my money, Lucas. I think I have every right." The guests were frozen in shock, their eyes darting between Ethan, Vanessa, and Lucas. "But it doesn't stop there," Ethan continued, his gaze hardening. He pulled out a second folder, this one containing the evidence he'd sent to Lucas's investors. "Lucas here has been running a fraudulent business, embezzling funds and conning investors. As of this morning, most of those investors have pulled out." Lucas's face turned red, his composure slipping. "You can't prove anything." "Oh, but I can," Ethan said smoothly. "And so can the district attorney's office. I made sure they got a copy of this file as well." Vanessa tried to stand, her voice trembling as she pleaded, "Ethan, please, let's talk about this privately." "Privately?" Ethan scoffed. You mean like the private conversations you had at the loft, or the private texts you sent to Lucas? No, Vanessa, this isn't private anymore. You made sure of that." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Guests began murmuring, some taking out their phones, others excusing themselves awkwardly. Vanessa looked around desperately, but there was no sympathy in the faces of her friends and colleagues. Lucas stormed out, shoving past the remaining guests, his bluster gone. Vanessa, on the other hand, sank into a chair, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. Ethan waited until the room cleared before he turned back to Vanessa. "I've already filed for divorce," he said coldly. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer, and don't expect to get much. The prenup saw to that." Vanessa stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't mean this. We can fix this." Ethan shook his head. "You've spent the last year destroying our marriage. There's nothing left to fix." He turned and walked away, leaving Vanessa alone at the table, her once perfect world in ruins. As Ethan stepped outside, the cool night air filled his lungs, bringing a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in months. He didn't look back. For the first time in a long time, the weight of Vanessa's betrayal was gone, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild his life on his terms. The great reveal had shattered their illusion, and now Ethan was free. Ethan's footsteps echoed in the cavernous lobby of the divorce attorney's office the morning after the dinner party. The glass doors swung shut behind him with a finality that mirrored his resolve. He felt no hesitation as he signed the paperwork initiating the divorce proceedings. Vanessa would soon be left to confront the consequences of her actions. As he walked back to his car, Ethan's phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert about Lucas. The story was already spreading. An investigation into financial fraud at Lucas's gallery was underway, spurred by multiple whistleblower reports. Ethan's lips curved into a grim smile. It seemed his anonymous email to the district attorney's office had done its work. Lucas's name, once associated with charm and creativity, was now synonymous with scandal. Ethan watched the world unravel for the two people who had wronged him. Vanessa's social circle quickly turned against her. The gossip from the dinner party spread like wildfire, leaving her ostracized from the same friends she had once hosted in their home. Invitations stopped coming, and her phone grew silent. Lucas's downfall was even swifter. With investors abandoning him and the gallery's accounts frozen, his lavish lifestyle came crashing down. Ethan learned through a mutual acquaintance that Lucas had fled the city, leaving behind debts and broken partnerships. But Ethan's satisfaction wasn't just about their demise. It was about reclaiming control of his own life. He spent the next few weeks making quiet but deliberate changes. First, he sold their suburban home. The place that had once been filled with warmth now felt tainted, its every corner a reminder of Vanessa's lies. The profits from the sale went into a new venture, a sleek apartment in the city, smaller but brimming with potential. Ethan's work life became another focus. Where he had once felt stagnant, he now threw himself into new projects. His reputation as a skilled software developer attracted offers from top firms, but Ethan chose to go independent, launching his own consultancy. The freedom energized him, filling the void Vanessa's betrayal had left. One afternoon, while packing the last of his belongings, Ethan came across an old photo of himself and Vanessa. They were on a beach, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. He paused, staring at the image. It wasn't sadness he felt, but curiosity. Had the happiness in that moment been real, or had it been another illusion? He placed the photo in a box labelled discard. Meanwhile, Vanessa tried to salvage what she could. She attempted to contact Ethan, leaving voicemails and sending long, apologetic texts. Each message carried a different tone, pleading, angry, nostalgic, but Ethan read them all with detachment. One message stood out: "I made a mistake. We can fix this. Don't throw everything away." Ethan laughed bitterly as he deleted it. The irony wasn't lost on him. She hadn't cared about throwing everything away when she was sipping wine in a luxury loft with Lucas. As for Lucas, he re-emerged briefly, sending Ethan an email that was equal parts threat and plea. "You think you've won, but you're just a bitter man trying to ruin lives. We both know Vanessa came to me because you weren't enough." Ethan didn't respond. Lucas's words lacked the power to wound. The man was a caricature, a failed con artist lashing out at the inevitable. Ethan's focus shifted to his future, one step at a time. He joined a cycling club, something he had always wanted to try, but never had the time for. He started volunteering at a non-profit that taught coding to underprivileged youth. These new routines weren't just distractions, they were steps toward rediscovering himself. Through the cycling club, Ethan made new friends. One of them, a woman named Claire, caught his attention. She was a web designer, independent and quick-witted, with an easy laugh that felt like a balm to Ethan's frayed nerves. They started talking more, their conversation shifting from casual banter to something deeper. One evening, after a long ride along the waterfront, Claire asked about his divorce. Her tone was careful, her curiosity genuine. "It's still fresh," Ethan admitted, gazing at the sunset over the water. "But I'm not bitter. If anything, I'm grateful. It forced me to see things clearly, to make changes I should have made a long time ago." Oh, Claire smiled. "Sounds like you're finally living for yourself." "I think I am," Ethan said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Vanessa, meanwhile, wasn't faring as well. The divorce settlement left her with little, just enough to cover her living expenses while she figured out her next steps. Her attempts to rebuild her life were met with resistance at every turn. People who had once praised her sophistication now avoided her. The whispers about her betrayal never quite faded. Lucas's absence compounded her struggles. He had disappeared without a word, taking with him any hope of a new life she might have envisioned. Ethan learned all of this through mutual acquaintances, but he didn't dwell on it. Vanessa's downfall was no longer his concern. Months after the dinner party, Ethan stood on the balcony of his new apartment, a glass of whiskey in hand. The city stretched out before him, alive with possibilities. He had grown stronger in the aftermath of the betrayal, not in spite of it, but because of it. The pain, the anger, the disbelief, it had all shaped him into someone new. He was no longer the man who overlooked the cracks in his life, no longer the husband who trusted blindly. He was someone who saw things as they were and took action to protect himself. Ethan sipped his whiskey and let the breeze wash over him. The past no longer haunted him. It was a story that had run its course. Now, his story was his alone to write. Vanessa's name crossed his mind less and less as the months passed. When he did think of her, it wasn't with anger, but with a quiet acceptance. She had made her choices, and he had made his. As for Lucas, he became a footnote, a cautionary tale in the city's art circles about what happened to those who lived beyond their means and underestimated the wrong people. Ethan's life wasn't perfect, but it was his, and as he looked out over the glittering cityscape, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace.